What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the W.A.D.E concept. Just really quickly, I hope everyone's staying safe and happy and healthy with their family and friends and loved ones during COVID-19 craziness. I understand it's not ideal, but we're stronger together, so I hope you guys are staying safe. Real quick, again, just a reminder, if you want to see the live stream version of this video and pretty much every other one, you got to check me out at twitch.tv/WPLEM. I'm doing my live stream reactions, my live stream recaps, which you'll see today. And just anything that I do live is going to be at twitch.tv/WPLEM. But without any further ado, today's video is episodes 3 and 4 of the Last Dance documentary covering behind the scenes of the 97-98 Chicago Bulls, looking for that 6th title. I won't interrupt you anymore. Take it away, Mr. W.A.D.E. Have a good one, guys. Welcome back to the W.A.D.E Concept Podcast. This is our Last Dance or The Last Dance recap. This is episodes 3 and 4, week 2, and we just got done watching the actual episodes 3 and 4. So we're here. If you guys didn't check it out, last week we did the recaps for episodes 1 and 2, and we're back here. And again, listen, before we get into anything, you got to give it up for ESPN and Michael Jordan and the documentary itself, like the way it's filmed, the people that are involved with the making of it, the arc of it, the way it's put together, the storyline, the plot that goes into each episode, and they're kind of built out as 2 episodes that really have one theme, you know. And this was the theme of the story of Dennis Rodman and his contribution to the Bulls, as well as the way Michael Jordan was able to learn and grow from Dennis Rodman before he was on the Bulls, to then obviously have Dennis Rodman on the Bulls and learn and grow from him in his time there as well. So it was the story of Dennis Rodman, Scotty, Michael, Phil Jackson, and again, Jerry Krause had a part in this story as well. But for the most part, it was the stories of Dennis Rodman, Michael Jordan, and his ascension. That's going to be the big overarching theme of this whole thing, is how Michael Jordan came to be the legend that he is in that 97-98 season, but also the stories that he learned in his youth, the lessons that he learned in his youth from this time, from, you know, growing up to North Carolina to his early time in the NBA, to then use all those lessons in that 97-98 season to go back one last time, one last dance, some would say, and get that ring. So today was episodes 3 and 4. By the way, guys, if you're new here, my name's W.A.D.E. I host a podcast called the W.A.D.E Concept. I talk about mostly MMA, but I'm a huge sports fan, always have been. Played football all my life, played basketball as a kid, always been a huge basketball, football fan, and obviously now I've fallen in love with the sport of MMA, and we talk about that a lot. But pop culture, sports, MMA, whatever it is, I love and I have a passion for, I talk about here. So thank you guys for being here. If you're new, make sure you follow the channel, and hopefully this video will be up on YouTube in congruent order with the last one as well. So be looking for that. My YouTube was in the starting Sue frame there. So let's just get right into it. So the first part of episodes 3 and 4, we see basically the introduction to Dennis Rodman. And Dennis Rodman, as we all know that are sports fans, kind of had 2 ways to go about, you know, you saw 2 different sides of Dennis Rodman when you talked about him. You saw the on-court Dennis Rodman, who was the worm, the demolition man, the guy that would go out and put everything on the line every single time he was on the floor, grabbing rebounds over taller guys. People don't remember Dennis Rodman played kind of a center power forward hybrid as an undersized guy. You know, yeah, in Detroit, you had guys like John Sally and Bill Laimbeer, and we're going to talk about his time there, but he almost played where he could guard positions 3 through 5, and not only could he be a pest as far as the way he played defense, but he was grabbing board after board after board, just high intensity, high volume gameplay, and you would think a guy like that would be one way, right? It's just that's who he is. On the court, off the court, he's just that. Well, in some respects, yeah, that's what he was, but in other respects, he was a completely different person off the court. Yeah, he lived hard and fast toward the latter part of his career, but as he was with the Pistons and growing up even, he was still trying to find himself, right? Still trying to, especially off the court, find out who he was. And there were some problems there from his youth and kind of where he grew up. And even early in episode 3, we get a look at the early days of Dennis Rodman before he goes to college at Southeast Oklahoma. He's 18 and gets kicked out of his house. So he's living home to home at 18 years old, just trying to find out, what he's going to do with himself. And so, in his own words, he just happened to catch an eye of a guy that was coaching at Southeast Oklahoma and said, hey, you want to come play for our basketball team? And Dennis kind of saw this as his way to be something, right? He saw this as his way to be something better than just walking around going home to home from 18 to 20. This is what he was doing. And so he starts giving 110%. He's a freak athletically. He's averaging 27 and 15. And, out of that, kind of another story that the same thing with Scottie Pippen and even Michael Jordan. Out of these adversarial times in their lives where Michael Jordan doesn't make his team, Scottie Pippen is not even recruited at all and becomes the equipment manager for Central Arkansas. These guys came from damn near nothing. All 3 guys that we've seen so far as the players, have really come from nothing and just ascended to such great heights. Granted, there's an athletic ability there that you have to have. Not everybody, myself included, would have been able to do that. These were freaks athletically, but we see Dennis Rodman go from that and be drafted by the Pistons. Now, I wrote notes today. I tried to write notes in episodes 1 and 2. I might go off topic with these notes. I wrote so many notes down that I'm not going to be able to get to everything. But I did write notes, and I wanted to make sure I hit on some really big points, so we're going to talk about that. But yeah, this is kind of how the documentary starts. Episode 3 is the understanding of Dennis Rodman on and off the court. That was the telling of Dennis Rodman. Even in episode 4, we get that a little bit. The difference is in him on the court, 100% focus, 100% effort, an understanding of the game that was uncanny, really, and his off the court kind of persona or person that maybe he didn't feel like he was able to express until he got to Detroit and hung out with some of the people that were on that Bad Boy Pistons team and understood I can be myself. I can kind of let go of this. And sometimes people attribute that to even his time dating Madonna, and he was dating Carmen Electra for a little bit, but we'll get to all that. I remember that early in the episode, they were talking about, again, the dichotomy of kind of what was going on in Dennis's early days, and then they'd flash back to 97-98 season, which they do a good amount in this documentary. Quite a bit they flash back and forward, and I love it because it tells 2 stories with one message, right? So they flash back to 1997-98, and if you guys remember where we left off last time, Scottie Pippen's holding out. He wants to be traded. He says he's not playing for the Bulls. It's over. I'm not coming back and playing for Jerry Krause. He berates Jerry Krause on the team bus. He's not a part of the Bulls team at this moment. So they're losing to start the 97-98 season. They're not playing well. I think they were 8-7. And Michael Jordan's looking for that number 2 guy because for those 6 or 5 championship runs, Scottie Pippen had kind of been it. Him, Horace Grant, some other guys, Paxson had stepped up, Steve Kerr. But for the most part, it was Scottie Pippen. And Scottie Pippen had widely been attributed as maybe the second best player in the NBA at that point. He just happened to play on the same team as the first best player in the NBA. So you have Scottie Pippen not there. Someone's got to step up. Dennis Rodman was not doing it. He was not stepping up. He wasn't taking that mantle. And then finally, they have a bad game. Dennis doesn't play well at all, plays super sloppy, can't get any boards. Michael Jordan, makes a point in the post-game press conference, be like, listen, we couldn't grab any rebounds. We just couldn't. The focus isn't there. We need to step up and this. And Dennis Rodman comes to Michael Jordan's hotel room and he says, hey, man, can I have a cigar? He didn't apologize. He didn't do the whole, hey, man, I'm really sorry. Let's play better. That's not Dennis Rodman's style. It's not who he is. He's the demolition man. Dennis Rodman really doesn't apologize for anything. I mean, he hasn't apologized for being who he is in his life. Not going to apologize for being the way he is on the court as far as some of the outbursts and the physicality. It's not who he is. So he wasn't about to apologize to Michael as far as saying the words, but Michael knew and Dennis knew that when he came to that hotel room and asked for an extra cigar, that was his way of making amends and being like, all right. And Dennis said this, all right, I fucked up. That's what happened. So I got you from now on. And then started playing better. So I thought that was a really important note to hit, that Michael was looking for that number 2 and Dennis was looking for someone to impress, was looking for someone to be like, I want someone to need me. That's kind of how I felt like Dennis wanted to be. He wanted to be needed by somebody. I felt like if there was no reason to play the game other than the fact that we were just going to get a win that night, I feel like that at that time for Dennis, it wasn't enough. He needed to be needed by somebody to then ascend to that next level. It wasn't just playing so you can get a W that night. It wasn't just playing to grab 10 rebounds and play 15 minutes or whatever it was. For Dennis, it was that next level of meaning toward the game. Was it a championship? Was it to be needed by the greatest player ever? Dennis needed those things to try to get him involved and get him more motivated, because an unmotivated Dennis Rodman, it wasn't good. He wasn't there, and he wouldn't perform at that same level, right? And it was very easy for Dennis Rodman to become unmotivated. So I thought that was a big story beat to hit there. And then it was something else was really cool. They talked to Dennis about his rebounding. Like, how were you able to be such a good rebounder? And he talked about something in so much detail that I've never heard anybody talk about, as far as like a basketball player. Maybe in meetings they talk about this stuff, but his awareness of shot like trajectory, the ability to understand by the person shooting. For example, he was like Larry Bird, when he shoots, he's got a lot of spin on the ball, so it's going to bounce off the rim and go further this way. You always hear that old adage that a good shot sometimes bounces off the rim a little softer. It hits a little softer because of the arc. And so that, sometimes it's easier to get that offensive board because it is, or get that shooter's roll on the rim. And he would talk about how if it was Jordan, his ball spun, but it didn't spin as fast. But so he had just this knowledge of whoever was shooting the ball, like Magic, he had no spin to it. Like he said, he's like, Magic didn't have any spin to his shot. So I knew it wasn't going to go too far, or I knew it was going to be here. He had an idea based off of his studies, and that's another thing that gets overlooked is Dennis Rodman. Yeah, he was the worm on the floor. He was slippery, could jump and do all these things and perform these amazing feats. But on the tape, he was a bookworm. The guy studied other players. Like, he understood not only defensive sets and motion and how to flow through the offense and move and be an off-ball pest, but he understood like rebounding trajectory and whose shot was going to go where, just from time and time again. And again, even in the documentary, he said, 3-4 in the morning when I was with the Pistons and it was just starting my career, I would get my friends out and get on the court and have them shoot from different spots just to perfect my awareness, perfect my anticipation of where the ball was going to bounce to. And he learned very quickly with the Pistons that, yes, he had strengths in scoring and he had strengths in getting to the basket, but his job, his role in the NBA, what was going to make him the best at what he did, or what he was needed to do, was to be a great defender and a great rebounder. And it's very, very rare that you see a guy accept that role. You see him accept it sometimes begrudgingly, but you see a guy accept that role and be the best at it. Just far and away the best at doing one thing specifically over and over. And not being a scorer, not being somebody that gets to touch the ball every possession, but having games. And they even, again, on the documentary said that he had 7 games in his career of 20 rebounds and 0 points. A specialist to the highest degree. And it was just cool to see like him talk in detail about how his mindset worked about getting rebounds and where to be on the floor. It was just different, and that's a good word to describe episodes 3 and 4, was just the different mentality of guys like Dennis Rodman, and for that matter, Phil Jackson. And we'll get to Phil and how he is their stories are very parallel as far as how they approach the game, who they are in general. The parallels between those guys are pretty interesting. But that was kind of how we let off episode 3. I was really impressed with Dennis Rodman's understanding and just kind of the mentality he had as far as how he rebounded the ball and how he was in position. So from there, we go to the next instance of Jerry Krause, and he's obviously a very vocal part of this documentary, kind of behind the scenes, and they paint it in the way they set the storylines of these episodes. They refer to him behind the scenes in some cases, but also the visuals have him behind the scenes in a lot of these shots, and it's like a visual reminder that while all this is going down, Jerry Krause is forming one of the greatest teams to have ever taken the floor in that Dynasty Bulls team, because they'll show a shot of Michael Jordan and Doug Collins, who we're going to get to right now, them hiring Doug Collins coaching, and they'll show a shot of Jerry Krause in the crowd, sitting, with his rolled up magazine, clapping it on his hands. And it's just a reminder that Jerry Krause is, I don't want to say the overarching villain, but he is the overarching kind of nemesis to the dream team in that or not, excuse me, not the Dream Team, but that Bulls dynasty in that sixth year, in that 97, 98 year. He is kind of the antagonist to Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson and Scottie Pippen's protagonist in that last year. So we get to 86, 87. Michael Jordan really starting to hit his prime, becoming the best player in the NBA, and the Bulls hired Doug Collins. And Doug Collins was a guy that Michael Jordan really gelled with. Doug Collins is super competitive, a high-intensity coach, a guy that really was the competitor that Michael Jordan wanted in a coach. And so they gelled right away. Michael Jordan loved playing for this guy. Doug Collins recognized that Michael Jordan was going to be, and if not was, the best player in the NBA, and started to develop an offense around getting him the ball. Now, I thought this was interesting. Michael Jordan had a competitive edge that really wasn't matched. And if you were going to coach him, you needed to match that competitive edge or give him something that he didn't already have. And so practices for the Bulls started to become more competitive, and Coach Collins would start to stack the odds against MJ in practice. And you're starting to see then, not only are you building a competitor with Michael Jordan, who is already the best player in the NBA, but now the franchise is turning when you have like-minded people like Doug Collins, who is also competitive and understands that Michael Jordan's the best, and start to challenge him more in practice and starts changing the atmosphere of the Bulls, who had really lost kind of everything. They'd been known as the choke artists in Chicago. Kind of before Michael Jordan got there, kind of a laughing stock of the city, right? We talked about it in our last episode, how they were being outsold by semi-pro soccer teams. So Doug Collins starts to change the culture, starts to turn it around. And then we get one of the greatest moments, especially visually, in the lore of Michael Jordan. And it's one of the greatest moments of the episode 3 of the documentary, in my opinion. We get the, I can't remember what year it was. I put it in my notes. I think it was the 88 or 89 Chicago Bulls and Cleveland Cavaliers series to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, this is the first time where Michael's starting to get to that playoff and really get deep into the playoffs. And so they go, at this time, you played 5-game series. They weren't playing 7-game series for every single level of the playoffs. The earlier rounds played 5-game series, meaning the first team to win 3 out of the 5 would move on to the next round. There's a 2-2 series. They're playing in Cleveland against a pretty decent Cleveland team at that time. And it goes down to the wire, right? It goes down to the wire. And we all know the story. We all know what happens. But they show a little bit before what happens. And Michael Jordan hits a shot with like 10 seconds left on the right side, layup off the glass, goes in. And the Cavs and Craig Elo, who is going to be important, obviously, what we're talking about next, come right back down the court, back screen, gets to the rim, easy layup. I think 3 seconds left. They call a timeout. Doug Collins says, we're getting Michael the ball. No doubts about it. We're getting him the ball. They throw it in. We all know what happens. Michael hits the shot. But there are some underlying storylines here that I thought were interesting. So if we were to back it all the way up to the beginning of that series, even Chicago sports writers had the Bulls as underdogs in that series. You're talking about the people that wrote for the Chicago Bulls or wrote for newspapers in Chicago saying, listen, the Bulls are going to get beaten 3, going to be beaten 4 and 5. So Michael Jordan finds these guys sitting at the arena in Cleveland because they had to travel with the Bulls. And he points to the first guy that did it, and he says, we already took care of you because they had already won enough games to not be swept in 3. Looks at the other guy, says, we took care of you in game 4 or 5. And he looks at the other guy, says, we're taking care of you tonight. This is before the game starts. So Michael hits the shot, yada, yada, and then he turns. And I've never understood what Michael said when he turns. And I might be misquoting, but Michael Wilbon, who was working in Chicago at the time, said that Michael said something along the lines of, you guys can all you fuckers go to hell or go the fuck home, something like that to the Cleveland crowd. And it's just one of those things in the lore of Michael Jordan that's just even more like tantalizing about him. You love to hear that kind of stuff, just the relief of finally getting over somewhat of a hump, winning that playoff series, and shutting all the people down that thought the Bulls were just going to pack it in and go home just like the years before and the years past. It wasn't going to happen this time. But another interesting thing, and probably the funniest thing out of episode 3, was in the timeout before Michael hits the shot on Craig Elo. We all have known it. Craig Elo falls to the ground in a heap. Michael hits the pose. All you fuckers go home. Before that, they're talking to Michael, and they said, coming out of the timeout, I saw they had Craig Elo on me, and that was a mistake. And then they cut to Ron Harper, who Mike says, listen, Ron Harper had guarded me the whole night, and he was doing way better than Craig Elo was. That was a mistake. They put Ron Harper on me, would have been a much more difficult shot. And Ron Harper says something like, they're in the Cavs huddle, and he goes to the coach and says, look, man, I got Mike. I can guard this dude. Coach is like, nah, I'm going to put Craig Elo on him. And Ron Harper sits back in his chair, and he's like, all right, then. That's what it's going to be? All right, then fuck the shit. And he just says it so, and again, it's on ESPN. They don't bleep it. He's like, all right, well, fuck this shit then. One of the funniest lines of episode 3. He's like, fuck this bullshit. I don't care. So funny, man. And it's just crazy to hear like that word still on ESPN. And Michael Wilbon says it too. And obviously Jordan. Hearing Jordan swear, I know it's not like the nice thing to say, but hearing Jordan swear is so like satisfying for some reason, because we're starting to peel back the layers of this godlike figure that Michael is and really humanize him. Yes, he's a phenomenal godlike basketball player, but as a human, he's just like any of us, man. Well, as far as the way he communicates, he's an uber-level competitor, but to hear him, speak in a way that's not just like super wrapped up and buttoned up, like he can just let loose on this, that makes this so much better. So, anyway, he wins his first playoff series, and then comes the first playoff series transitioning, and this is kind of where episode 3 starts to come to a close, versus the Bad Boy Pistons in that 1989-90 series. I think it was, 80 or 89, excuse me. They lose in 89, so this is the first one. And this is where we get our first look at the Jordan rules. Now, this documentary doesn't highlight it to a portion that's very like in depth, because it's not about the Jordan rules. It's not what this documentary is about. But it's our first look at Dennis Rodman on the Bad Boy Pistons versus the Michael Jordan Bulls. And again, at the time, Michael Jordan, league MVP, won Defensive Player of the Year, won the Slam Dunk Contest, winning scoring title after scoring title. And everybody, like John Sally's interviewed on this, Isaiah Thomas is interviewed on this. They, to this day, have this idea, and rightfully so, that Jordan was the heir apparent, right? Jordan was the one that the league wanted to be the next greatest player. They'd had Magic. They had Larry Bird. The league probably didn't want the Bad Boy Pistons as the face, winning championship after championship, but the thing was, they still had to get on the court and play, and it didn't matter what the league wanted, because the Bad Boy Pistons were one of the best defenses ever. You had Dennis Rodman, you had John Sally, you had Joe Dumars, you had Bill Laimbeer, you had Isaiah Thomas, all on this team. And you talk about the Jordan rules. So Jordan comes into the series, again, very one-on-one, get Jordan the ball, let him isolate and score was kind of the philosophy of Doug Collins, and it backfired. Because what you had happen was this development of the Jordan rules, which were not, super outlined, other than the fact that don't let him jump. Everybody in the interview, do not let Michael leave the floor. If you let him leave the floor, John Sally said this, I am not quoting, but I'm paraphrasing, if you let him leave the floor, he's not human, so we can't do that. So hit him, don't let him leave the floor, and if he gets into the air, make him pay for it. I did write down some notes on the Jordan rules as they were officially as they were officially referred to. Basically, they wanted to push Michael to the elbow, push him to his left, and keep him away from the baseline. And if he got to the baseline, or if he got into the air, they were going to hit him. They were going to try to hurt him. And that was from Dennis Rodman. That was from Isaiah Thomas, John Sally. We were going to hurt him if he tried to come to the paint, because that was our home. We know that he was the highlight player, but we didn't think that anybody else could beat us, so we wanted to test him, and they did. And that tactic worked. They worked because they beat the Bulls that year. They intimidated the Bulls. They kind of pushed them around. And it was the first kind of realization for Michael Jordan that the way that things had to change, as far as like the way they approached the game. They had to be more mentally tough. And Scottie wasn't there. Michael even, at that time didn't understand the level it was going to take to beat these Pistons. And so from that, we go back to kind of highlighting Dennis Rodman. And Dennis Rodman, man, they show some highlights from that series, and he's locking down Scotty. He's intimidating Scotty. He's locking down the defensive boards. He's making Michael earn everything. He's all over Michael, being a pest. And you just get to see, again, that the on-court focused, motivated Dennis Rodman with those bad boy Pistons, my Lord, watching him play was a treat. So that was interesting. So we watch Dennis Rodman. From there, it's kind of a transition to the Pistons winning their first title. Excuse me. And we get a little bit of the, I don't want to say dissension, but the decline in Dennis Rodman. From that, hitting the high top, hitting the mountaintop, winning a title, winning another title. And then there's the story that breaks about Dennis Rodman having a gun in his car, being at the arena, at the Detroit Pistons arena with a gun in his car in the front seat loaded. And having to answer questions the next day. He said he's fine. On the documentary, he talks in more depth about it, and he says, look, thank God I fell asleep. If I didn't fall asleep, things could have gotten out of control because I was in a bad place at that time in my life. I didn't really care about a lot. Nothing really bothered me. And you just kind of left it at, thank goodness I fell asleep that night, because basically he showed up to the Detroit arena at like 2:33 in the morning, fell asleep in his car, and the police happened to, come up and wake him up, and nothing happened. But obviously that's kind of a red flag. And the first time you start to see the mentality of kind of what Dennis Rodman was going through off the court, regardless of how good he was and the intention that he played with on the court, off the court, that person wasn't able to either be themselves or just wasn't able to communicate in the way that he felt like he could. So he kind of just stayed to himself, and it built up, and it came very close to exploding, but luckily it didn't. But anyway, from there we see him traded to the Spurs after the incident. He gets to the Spurs, kind of has a tumultuous time with the Spurs, can't really get along, is going through the same sort of stuff. He's kind of having I don't know what you call it, like an NBA career midlife crisis deal where he's just kind of throwing tantrums on the court, very frustrated, agitated, kind of going through phases. We start to see the Demolition Man character that we attribute to the bright colored hair of Dennis Rodman. No more is the clean shaven high top fade. You see all the highlighter curls, and you see the different shades of hair and the eye makeup and the tattoos and the lip rings. Everything about him starts to scream eccentric and attention. And we see a guy that is not happy. We see a guy that is doomed to spin himself out of the league at some point, because it looks like he's just not the same player, and his antics are becoming more and more and more on the court and off. And we hear Dennis himself talking about now how the drinking had become an issue. I don't want to say an issue, but it had started. He'd started to drink more. He started to stay out a little later at night, started to party a little more. And in simpler terms, his time with the Spurs was very short-lived and wasn't a lot to speak about. Yes, he was still one of the better rebounders in the game at that point, maybe the best rebounder in the game. But his team wasn't getting better. He wasn't making his team better. And it just didn't seem like the same Dennis Rodman that we had seen in Detroit. So, and this is kind of in episode 3, they kind of touch on it really quickly. And there's a funny Craig Sager moment. And I think this is after he had signed with the Bulls. So they transition to the meeting that Phil has with Dennis when again, Jerry Krause looks at Dennis and says, hey, we need to bring this guy in. I think he can help this team. And everybody said, don't do it. He does it anyway. They have a meeting with Phil. Phil comes in, tries to shake Dennis's hand. He doesn't even stand up to greet Phil. And he says, Dennis, stand up, take your hat off, shake my hand. Let's talk. And, they work it out, and Dennis becomes a part of the Bulls. And again, they're just kind of going through montages of Dennis, and he's walking into the arena, right? And this was a really nice touch because as sports fans, this documentary is something we needed, not only for the in-depth content we get about Michael Jordan and that team, but just the little moments, the little cameo moments that make us just kind of sit back and go, oh my God, that's awesome. And so Huey Brown is obviously on this documentary as one of the announcers for some of these global networks. That's always cool, Bob Costas. But the cameo moment of episode 3 goes to Craig Sager, the lovable, obviously Rest in peace to Craig Sager, but the lovable, amazing Craig Sager that we all know for the colorful suits and his time on TNT, but he's passing Dennis Rodman in a hallway, and this is one of the times where I guess Dennis had gotten fined for something he'd said or done, and he slips him a 20, and he says, "Hey, this should help you pay for that fine," and he just keeps walking. And it's a nice little funny kind of heartwarming joke, and it reminds you that Craig Sager, man, one of the legends of the industry, had been doing it for forever, and it was just a cool little cameo to see him to interact with Dennis, even though Dennis was like, "Oh, he just wants something from me," because that was the mindset he was in. Everybody wanted something from Dennis. And he was becoming a global star because of these antics and the way he was acting and the tattoos and everything else. But that moment was cool just to kind of see Craig Sager again on our TV screens, somebody that brought so much joy to the NBA fandom and people in the industry. So that was cool. And they kind of end episode 3 by transitioning back to 1997. As they talk about Dennis Rodman signing, right? He signs, he's with the Bulls. Then they transition to 1997, kind of flash forward again. And at the end of episode 3, we get the return of Scottie Pippen to the team in 1997 after about 35 games. The Bulls had started to hit their stride. It's Michael and it's Dennis, and they're doing really well. They're 24-11, I think, at that point. And they cut to an interview with Scottie, and they ask him, what made you change your mind? Why are you coming back to the Bulls? And he just said, listen, it was going to come down to me versus the organization. And they were going to start finding me. And I can't really win that battle. I didn't really have any leverage. So I'm back. So we're just going to make the best of it. And here I go. And Scottie comes back. And there's a very interesting part to where they kind of end episode 3. It's basically Dennis Rodman loved being needed by Michael Jordan. We talked about it earlier. He loved being needed by Michael. But when Scottie came back, Dennis took kind of a back seat to Scottie, Michael, and Horace Grant, right? The big three at that time, three amigos. Those guys knew how to play together. They gelled well. It didn't really take a lot for them to understand what the other was doing. Dennis, on the other hand, kind of was just getting that trust and that relationship with Michael. So when Scottie came back, he wasn't really as much of a focal point to Michael as he was in that time, at least for those couple of, 10 to 20 games there. So Dennis starts to kind of tail off again a little bit and gets a little unmotivated once again. And that's kind of where we end episode 3 as Michael starts describing a trip that Dennis had requested to Phil Jackson. It's actually pretty funny. And he said, listen, basically what happened is Dennis just Phil comes up to me one day at practice and says, hey, man, I need you to come in the office. And he goes in the office, and it's Phil, it's Michael, and it's Dennis in the office. He says, look, Dennis needs a vacation. And they kind of just cut episode 3 right there. And so episode 3, it very much, was the story of Dennis Rodman, the dichotomy between Dennis Rodman's rise to the NBA and his almost immediate success with the Bad Boy Pistons, and on Michael Jordan and the Bulls side, trying to figure out this puzzle that was the Bad Boy Pistons. And how do we do it? How do we get over this hump? They're so much more physical than we are, so much more intense than we are. They hurt us. They hit us every time we go to the lane. And to the dichotomy and kind of what plays to Dennis Rodman was Dennis liked pain. Dennis liked being in the enforcer, liked being a guy that would get down and dirty and get rebounds and dive out of bounds for balls and do all the things that nobody else wanted to do. And he understood he was good at it. And it was part of how he was kind of brought up. He was just, he didn't grow up in a nice place. It was rough for him. So he kind of brought that roughness, that toughness to the NBA court. And he did it on a team that welcomed it. They didn't suppress it. They didn't say, well, this is what you're going to do. We don't need you to be tossing guys around. They were like, listen, if you're going to foul someone, foul them hard. Have some intent behind it, because there's no, why would you give up a cheap foul if you can hurt the guy? If you can show him, hey, listen, you ain't coming in here easy. It's not going to be one of the guys they quoted that was, I think it was a rapper. He said, listen, everybody at that time knew you come to Detroit, you're coming to get your ass whipped. That's just what it is. And so episode 3 was very much Dennis Rodman on and off the court, and the parallel with Michael Jordan trying to become a champion, trying to get over that hump. And Dennis Rodman basically being one of the reasons he can't do it. And it's tied together with ultimately Dennis Rodman signing to the Bulls amidst a ton of backlash from Bull fandom, who looked at him as this guy that had kept Michael from winning 2 or 3 championships and been kind of a guy that was hated in Chicago. And then they sign him, and it becomes a vital part to that Chicago team as well. So it was kind of the blending of one of Michael's biggest adversaries becoming one of his biggest teammates that helped him go on that second run. So episode 3, the highlights for me, the Craig Sager cameo, definitely. That was something that was super cool. The Ron Harper quote was hilarious. And then they just get into the juiciness of the Vegas story, which we're going to get to in episode 4. But those were definitely the highlights. And obviously, anytime they show Michael Jordan highlights, like him on the court, that stuff's amazing. It's hard not to just wow and be in awe. The shot, I tweeted that a second ago. I said the shot over Craig Elo, like most other Jordan highlights, stands the test of time. To this day, 10, 30 years later, it's one of those highlights that just doesn't get old. It looks like the man hangs in the air, like time around him stops. Like imagine you're walking down the street, you keep walking, but everybody else freezes, right? Or you jump into the air, you keep going up, and everybody else just kind of comes back down and stays there while you're still hanging in the air. And Michael Jordan had that ability, man. He hangs in the air, and he kind of rocks the basketball back and forth and lets it fly. And, I mean, everybody and their mother knew that Michael Jordan was getting that ball, but for him to not only get the ball, create a shot for himself, hang in the air and hit that, I mean, it was the birth of the greatness that we would see from Michael Jordan in the playoffs for the rest of his career. But that highlight stands the test of time for me. So those were the highlights for episode 3, but just watching that again, I could watch it over and over. I could watch him do that. I could watch a Michael Jordan highlight video over and over if I had to for the rest of quarantine. I just could. And this documentary has been a very good reminder of some of the stuff you forget when you don't, when time just moves on and things, you don't see as much Michael Jordan anymore. It comes right back to you. It puts me right back to being like a 6 and 7 year old kid. And even, when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, when the highlights of Michael Jordan started to come out and I was still fairly young, but I was just blown away, and it takes me right back to that. So anyway, from there, we transition to episode 4, and episode 4 starts out pretty hilarious. So we get this almost bargaining between Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan, and Dennis Rodman about midway through the season. Well, not midway, but through the early part of 1997-98. And Rodman just looks at him and is like, hey, man, listen, I need a vacation. I need a vacation. If I keep doing this, it's not going to go well. I'm not having fun. This isn't something that I'm liking. And you guys, my production's not there. I need a vacation. And Mike's looking around like, well, hell, if anybody needs a vacation, I think I need a vacation too, but that's not how it works. We're in the middle of an NBA basketball season. We can't do vacation. What are you talking about? And Phil's like, listen, Michael, let's just hear him out. He says he needs a vacation. So they work on it. They say, okay, how is 48 hours? If we give you 48 hours, can that be your vacation? And they pan to Dennis. And Dennis says, look, I was willing to work with whatever I got. If 48 hours is the number they gave me, I was going to take it because I came into the thing thinking I wasn't going to get anything. So they give him 48 hours. My man gets on a plane, immediately goes to Vegas. And obviously a vacation for Dennis Rodman isn't going to the beach, relaxing, putting your toes in the sand, maybe going out into the ocean, getting your splash on. Hell no. A vacation for Dennis Rodman is going to Vegas. He's dating Carmen Electra at the time, it's Carmen Electra. He goes to Vegas, goes partying like crazy. She even said that at that time, I tried to write down the quote again, I'm paraphrasing. At that time, being Dennis Rodman's girlfriend was an occupational hazard. They would just be up all night, bar after bar, after party, staying up late, not going to bed, no rest, just party. And Vegas is the spot to do it. I mean, they call New York the city that never sleeps, but I don't know how Vegas is not mentioned in that same breath, because those places, those casinos are open till the early AMs. They might, I don't know what time if they do close, but they're open very, very late. And Dennis Rodman was one definitely to burn the midnight oil. So they go on this trip. He is partying nonstop. He's wild. Obviously, the parties are alcohol driven. There are some other things involved, and he doesn't come back on time. I think they said he spent 5 days out there versus the 2 days he was supposed to be allotted. So another interesting kind of tidbit, he doesn't come back. They have to go get him. They have to go and get Dennis Rodman in Vegas. So Michael Jordan walks up, knocks on Dennis Rodman's door. Carmen Electra says, again, quoting from her, paraphrasing, she says, we get a knock at the door in the morning, and it's Michael Jordan. I was so scared for him to see her like that, for Michael Jordan to see her like that, her being Dennis Rodman's girlfriend, but because it's Michael Jordan, she's so scared of Michael Jordan, the god of basketball, to see her like that she hides from him. She hides in the hotel room from Michael Jordan as he comes to get Dennis Rodman off a bender in Vegas. This is the stuff I'm talking about. You can't get this anywhere else. This would have never been said anywhere else. It would have been all left to rumor, which Steve Kerr's, kind of alluded to it, but not to that degree. So that's why we watch this stuff, man. Other than, reliving the glorious basketball years of Michael Jordan, that stuff, you're not going to get that anywhere else. So that was really, hilarious one, but just interesting. Like, Carmen Electra cared that much about what Michael Jordan thought of her that she was just hiding from him as he came to just drag Dennis Rodman back to a team after a bender in Vegas where if he was 5 days late, there's no telling how long he would have stayed. You know what I mean? So anyway, they get Dennis back. They get Dennis back, and this was another thing. Again, it just talks to the ability of Dennis to be one thing off the court and then be another on the court. Because when he played hard, but it was time to work. There wasn't any working, like outworking Dennis Rodman. It just wasn't. The guy was an absolute freak of nature physically, and he used all the advantages he had, and somehow, on lack of sleep, drinking, partying, doing all that, he was still able to maintain a crazy level of athleticism and pace. And they talk about this. They said there was a practice that Phil calls, they call it an Indian drill, where you were running around the gym, and the guy at the last part of the line, when Phil blew the whistle, had to sprint up and beat the guy in the front of the line. So everyone had to sprint and beat the guy in the front of the line. So Michael, obviously, they're coming off a road trip. He's a little tired. He's like, look, we're not running this thing hard. Everybody, we are not running this thing hard. So if you're in the front of the line, you're jogging real slow. We're all jogging real slow, keeping a nice pace, get a little jog in, but nothing more. So everybody's jogging, going slow, and then Phil blows the whistle, and it happens to be Dennis Rodman in the front, and Dennis takes off in a dead sprint. And Michael said it took them 4 laps to catch Dennis. And that was just his mentality. And Michael had such an interesting quote. He said Dennis was running like he needed to get away. And when he said it, I don't know if you understand the magnitude of what he said, but it seemed like that. He goes, maybe it was just Dennis's mentality. He just needed to get away. But when he said it, I thought about it. I was like, dang, man. That's Dennis's mentality. He just needs to get away. Maybe that's why he plays so hard. Maybe that's why he goes 110% every time he's on the court. He just needs to get away from whatever it is that's bothering him up here, from whatever it is that he can't express off the court, and he can't maybe even express in words. He needs to get away from those things. Or when he was 18 to 20 years old and he was looking around for what he was going to do with his life, and he needed to get away, he found all that through effort on a basketball court. He found all that through physical pace and the ability to build himself up, and the toughness and the strength and just the 110% effort and focus he gave on a basketball court. He was able to get away from those things that he was, I don't want to say running from, but kind of running from in kind of the mediocrity of regular life. He was able to run away from those things and run toward greatness just by giving more effort than everybody else. And when he said it, I was like, man, that's such an important thing that Michael just said. And I don't even know if he thought about it as I'm thinking about it in that moment, but it's a great summary for what Dennis Rodman is, especially in the basketball sense. He is running like he's running to get away from something. He's playing with the effort like he's playing so that if he plays so hard, he can get away from whatever it is that's going on with him. He plays so hard that he have to think about whatever it is that's bothering him, all the stuff that's going on mentally with him. If he's having to do X, Y, and Z that he hates, but if he plays super, super hard and focuses so hard on this game of basketball, he can get away from that. So I thought it was a cool quote from Michael. I don't think he meant what I took out of it, but I took that from it. So from there, they talk about the parallels between Phil Jackson and Dennis Rodman, which the two guys are pretty similar. They both have a very different mindset when it comes to not only basketball, but life in general. Phil is very in touch with Native American traditions and rituals and artifacts, because he grew up in, I think it was in North Dakota, I want to say, or somewhere in kind of the separated part of the United States as far as kind of just being away from everybody. And he grew up, living around Indian reservations and playing in circles of friends that weren't necessarily white or the same ethnic group. He played a lot with Native American kids and things like that. So he grew up differently. Now his parents were Orthodox Baptists and lived that way, but he was always more into sports. And through sports and through his affiliation with growing up around Native American people, he developed a different mindset about how to approach the game of basketball, how to approach his life, and how to focus. And so, again, the parallels between them, they're both really tough. Both guys were kind of mavericks in a sense that they didn't just walk the same path that everybody thought you needed to walk to be great. You didn't have to, or they didn't subscribe to just, everybody is one way and that is it. They were different in their mindsets and the way they approached things and the way they looked at things, and just in the way they focused in basketball. Like whatever was going on outside of basketball, I think Phil was like a Zen Buddhist. He believed in a lot of different breathing and focusing through, looking inward into yourself. All that stuff led to the intense focus that, again, conjoined with guys like Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan was a central theme. Focus on the basketball court. Whatever you did outside of this, whatever you believed outside of this, whatever, we welcome it as long as you can focus on the basketball court. And I thought Phil and Dennis, two guys that you wouldn't think would have a lot of similarities, really did in that respect. So from that, we transitioned to the hiring of Phil Jackson. Off the storyline of Dennis and Phil, we transitioned to the hiring of Phil Jackson, and they talk about how, he was brought up as a assistant coach from different smaller leagues and the ABA leagues and coaching in Puerto Rico. But he was brought up as an assistant coach to Doug Collins. And Doug Collins had an interesting thing to say. He said, when Phil was brought in, after about 2 years of him being there, Phil was the coach. I could tell Phil was the coach. And even the producers asked him, they're like, what do you mean by that? He said, I just had a feeling. And they go, you don't want to go into more detail? And he said, well, listen, there's not a lot more detail I can go into. I just had a feeling. And I don't think that's him saying I had a feeling I was going to be replaced. It could have been that. It could have just been that. But I think it was also a feeling in his own mind that Phil had become such a big part of the coaching staff that it felt like he was actually the coach. And then again, we talk about how Phil was brought up by Jerry Krause to be a part of this team based off of Jerry Krause's love for another assistant coach called Tex Winter, who I didn't know this, but is kind of the developer of the triangle style offense. Now, if you guys, I'm not going to sit here and explain the triangle offense, but it's basically the way Phil Jackson approaches the offensive side of the basketball court. A constant motion giving you options off of a set of positions where players would be in a triangle position on either side of the floor and then running motion offense through that. That doesn't sound very descriptive or simple to understand, but in practice, it's a pretty simple offense that has a lot of possibilities off of a basic movement or few movements from players. So it gives the players freedom to move. It focuses on movement of the basketball, everyone touching the basketball, and then finding either the open player or the right player for that possession to score whatever it would be. Now, this was a little bit of a source of contention for Michael Jordan, who was a big Doug Collins fan, as we talked about. When Phil gets hired on as the head coach, Michael wasn't a big Phil guy. He says it himself in the documentary. Michael did not like the idea of taking the ball out of his hands. He was a 3-time scoring title, MVP of the league. He didn't want the ball to be going to Bill Cartwright, in his own words, with 5 seconds left on the shot clock. He didn't think that was a good possession. He thought it was bullshit. That's what he said. And at the time, you'd be inclined to agree with him. But Phil had a plan for this offense. He had a plan for Michael Jordan, and he basically told him, he said, look, if you want to beat the Detroit Pistons, we can't play isolation basketball. We can't just play with Michael Jordan gets the ball on the wing or on the elbow and works isolation one-on-ones to get to the rim or get to his shot on the baseline, because that's not going to work. You know how we know it's not going to work? We've tried it, and we failed. So can you open up your mind to possibly doing this? And Michael Jordan, again, it's a credit to him as the greatest. You know, he's the greatest basketball player on earth, and he's being asked to take less touches, to take less shots, to not average as much points per game. And Michael says, okay, like I'll try this out. And because Michael was so willing to be able to kind of pull back the reins on himself and understand and play through the triangle offense that Phil Jackson had learned from Tex Winter and started to implement with the Bulls, they started to have more success. It took a while. I think some of the Bulls players, Paxton was saying it took a couple of years, but once they started to really understand it and play through it the right way, it was almost like they couldn't be stopped. I mean, you started to see the strengths of Michael Jordan still be there, but also it gave elevation to the game of Scottie Pippen. And Scottie Pippen, again, comes back into the documentary. They show him, again, we talked about this in our first breakdown, they show Scottie as more of a point forward. And really the only person that was doing that at the time was Magic Johnson. But Scottie had grown up playing point guard when he was a shorter guy before he hit that massive growth spurt where he gained like 6 inches in a summer. He was 6'1", 155 pounds as the equipment manager at Central Arkansas, but he was a point guard. So he had a really good handle on the ball, and the triangle offense allowed him to become that once again. In some sense, he got more touches on the ball. He was able to facilitate and be that guy that could not only play 1 through 5 defense, but also facilitate on the offensive end, get better shots to Michael or to guys like Paxton or find Horace Grant, and then move the ball that way. It wasn't necessarily so focused on Michael, so the other players around him were starting to elevate. They were starting to become better players, which they were going to need if they were going to beat the Bad Boy Pistons. So from there, we transition into the 1990 playoffs, where Michael Jordan and the Bulls, they had just come off losing to the Pistons in '89. The Pistons go on to win the finals. But they were the only team to beat the Pistons in that playoffs that year. They were the only team to beat them. They beat them twice. But they come back in the 1990 Eastern Conference Finals, and they take them to 7 games. 7 games, and which is where the migraine game comes into play for Scottie Pippen. Now, I didn't know too much about this, the migraine game, but apparently Scottie Pippen, Game 7 comes, trying to go through warm-ups, starts being blinded in his eyes. And I've never personally had a migraine to that extent where I've been blinded in my eyes and can't see. But if you talk to people that have like chronic migraines, it's almost debilitating. But I don't want to say it's as funny, but the Michael Jordan mentality was they interview Michael and he's like, listen, I didn't dispute the fact that he had a migraine. I just knew we had a game to win. And you can tell when Michael says stuff like that I truly believe that Michael doesn't doubt that Scottie Pippen had a migraine in that game, or had something going on in his, like with a massive headache. But to Michael, it was just that. It was just a headache, and that he should have been able to play through it. Michael was just like perplexed by how he couldn't play through it. He never said those things, but you can tell in the way he answers that question and just the body language he showed when he answered it, that Michael didn't. I think that Michael's, yes, he's like, yeah, okay, Scottie had a migraine. But I think he also in the back of his head is like, I don't know why can't he play through it? Like, it's just Michael Jordan mentality. It's just like, unless it's broke or dangling off, you should be playing through that. We should be winning this game, win at all costs. We hear that theme come up over and over in this documentary. Michael says, listen, I was trying to win at all costs. So I'm sure that Michael was confused as the fact that why Scottie couldn't play through that in Game 7. But that wasn't the only reason that the Pistons moved on. It was, again, the issues with the Pistons being more physical, the Pistons finding a way to just be more antagonistic, always hitting, always being the aggressor, and making the Bulls, getting a rise out of the Bulls, whether it was the Bulls were complaining to the officials or they were showing emotions or they were getting frustrated. The Pistons had their number. They straight up did. And it wasn't just Michael that they had. They were in Scottie's head. They'd get Horace Grant off his game that way. It's just the way they beat you. They were grimy and dirty and didn't do things that maybe the sportsmanship-like way, or didn't do things the clean way, but they were going to get to you. regardless of how many attempts that it took, how many times you came to the basket, you were eating a forearm, an elbow, they were going to shove you down, punch you if it came to it, and they were going to play scrappy defense, and it bothered Michael even that year. So they lose Game 7, and this is an important part as well. Michael shakes hands with everyone, and the Pistons move on, and they win the finals again. And Michael goes, listen, I'm so tired of being the one that gets bullied and hit and hurt. And I'm tired of us being bullied and hit and hurt and reacting to the Pistons. And everybody, he challenged everybody on that team that summer, no vacations. We're getting in the weight room and we're getting bigger. We're getting stronger. We're going to be the ones. And I wrote down what he said. Michael said, I want to administer pain. He said, I'm sick of being the one that takes the pain. I want to administer pain. And when he said it, there was a look in his eye, even, again, 30 years later, that there's that vengeance there. Because he says in this documentary, he goes, they ask him, they say, talk about your feelings toward the Pistons. And he goes, oh, God, it was hate. It was pure hate. And he goes, some of that still lasts to today. So 30 years later, old habits die hard, man. And you can tell when he's talking about that time in his life that the viciousness and the visceral reaction that he has just thinking about the Pistons and how he wanted to administer the pain they were giving him, that stuff is deep, deep embedded in him. So you could tell the emotion coming out of Michael there. So anyway, they show the montage of the guys beefing up, and there's not a lot of weight on those bars. Let's be honest. I mean, granted, those guys are 6'7", 6'8", 7 feet. They're not supposed to be bodybuilders, right? But it's funny to watch them. You know, they're like, oh, we're going to get so strong, all this. And they're bench pressing like 135. But again, 6'7", 6'8", you don't want to build too much muscle for a guy like Michael Jordan, who is probably the greatest athlete for basketball, like built perfectly for basketball. So you don't want to put too much muscle on a guy like that. But just like in a game, Michael Jordan's mindset was in the weight room to do more. If they gave him an exercise to do 6 reps in, he was doing 12, so that carried right over. And the entire team rallied around that. They rallied around the fact that they felt like they weren't aggressive enough. They weren't stepping up to the plate when it came to the physicality. And they walked into that season with that mindset of, we are going to be the ones doling out pain. We're going to be the ones that are the enforcers, are the ones that to be feared. We're not fearing anyone. We're going to go and take what's ours and be feared. And if anybody's in the way, then we're going to deal with that. And so they enter that season that way. And they go finally back to the Eastern Conference Finals. They beat the Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals. They pretty much sweep. I think they did. I think they sweep the Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals. And when all hope is lost for the Pistons and all the bullying doesn't work, they even show a clip of Dennis Rodman. Again, we go back to Dennis, shoving Scottie Pippen on a layup attempt. And he shoves him. After he fouls him, he shoves him and could have hurt him. And Scottie didn't react. He didn't do a thing. He didn't complain. He didn't get up and swing on him. He just went and shot his free throws. Basically saying to the Pistons and saying to that entire city and to that organization, your time, it came and now it's gone. And now it's our time. And so the Pistons had nothing left. They didn't have any other tactics. They couldn't get in the heads of the Bulls anymore, and the Bulls were now the intimidators. They were the ones to now be feared. It was now the Bulls' time, and now we get to the part that I think everybody wanted to see in this documentary, and it is the rivalry or the creation of the rivalry between Michael Jordan and Isaiah Thomas. And I don't know, man. If we are to believe that this was the reason that this rivalry was so big is because of this one interaction, I highly doubt it. What I think is those years of just being beaten over and over by the Pistons built up this hatred, like Michael Jordan said, in his own brain of those Pistons. And this next thing was just the icing on the cake that would not let him forgive those same Pistons and really the leader of the Pistons, Isaiah Thomas. So the game 4 is over. I think there's 7 seconds left. The Bulls have basically beaten the Pistons. But instead of what you would see today, the traditional horn sounds, both teams shake hands, dap up, hey man, good series, whatever it is, leave the court. That's not what happens. Instead, this is Isaiah's words, says Bill Laimbeer comes up to me in my ear and says, we're not shaking their hands. That's not the way we're going out. So instead, the Pistons don't shake anyone's hands. And Dennis says, listen, we aren't about to shake them hands. Okay, they beat our ass. So what? We're not about to shake your hand. What would we shake your hand for? Again, just the attitude of the Detroit Bad Boy Pistons staying with the moniker. We're going to win like bad boys. We're going to go out like bad boys. Sportsmanship be damned, you know? And so instead of shaking hands, they just walk straight. By the way, they had to walk by the Bulls bench, right? So here's the exit. The Pistons on this side of the floor, they had to walk this way to get to the exit. So they walk by the entire Bulls bench. Michael Jordan, Scotty, Horace, everybody included, walk straight by him. Don't even look at him. Don't say hey to him. Don't shake any hands. Just bolt directly to the locker room. And again, this is interesting because we get Michael Jordan in an interview and he says, listen, they get Isaiah Thomas in an interview. He says, listen, that's the way that teams went out at that time. It's like, it's not like today's game where guys shake hands, whatever. When we beat the Celtics and we were starting to take over that dynasty, they walked off the floor when the game was still going on. That's just the way winners went out, or losers went out that had been on top as winners for so long. But the way he's saying it is like he is explaining himself for being a sore loser. It's what it looked like to me. And it is what it is. Listen, you don't have to have respect, whatever. In my opinion, you should acknowledge the fact that you were cleanly and soundly beaten. And that's kind of where I stand on the whole thing. I don't think they should have just walked off and not shaken hands or anything, especially after the 2 years previous, Michael stood there and took his licks and licked his wounds and said, hey, man, congratulations, whatever, and dapped it up with Isaiah Thomas on the court after they lost. But for Isaiah and the whole team to kind of just walk off, Horace Grant was quoted as saying they were straight up bitches for it, which I thought was, wow. Again, ESPN, you don't expect to hear that stuff. But they show Michael Jordan the interview that Isaiah gave for the Last Dance documentary, explaining himself for why he didn't do it. But before they show Michael says, I know what you're going to show me. He's like, listen, he's either going to make some excuse, talk about how, today's game's different, whatever. He's going to find a way to make an excuse for him being an asshole. And that's what he said. And I was like, whoa. And again, just the way Michael said it, there was some malice, there was definitely some, I don't want to say hurt feelings, but definitely something left, again, deep inside from him to still call Isaiah an asshole. He goes, guy's an asshole, always been an asshole. So I was like, okay, there's still something there. That thing, old habits haven't died hard for Michael at all, and he still holds on to that. That grudge is still there. So again, they showed it to him, and he looks at it, and Isaiah, in my opinion, does make a little bit of an excuse, and Michael just looks at the camera and he's like, see? So yeah, Michael and Isaiah still very much rivals. Still, again, when he was talking about there's still some hatred there to this day, I think we all have a feeling about who he's talking about based off of the whole interaction that they showed him. Anyway, I thought that was probably the most interesting part of episode 4 was the walk-off explanation, and then Michael calling Isaiah an asshole because of it. Those were some shots fired again, still in 2020. I think this was filmed in 2015 or something, 2013 or 14, but still, to this day, there's definitely some hatred there. I don't think it's going to get any better after it being filmed in front of the world either. So it is what it is. But in the closing of episode 4, they finally show Michael, and this is interesting too. It was Michael moving on to the finals against the Western Conference, Dynasty Lakers, led by Magic Johnson, James Worthy, and Michael getting that time again with Magic to kind of put himself in the upper echelon of legends. And he talked about this ad nauseum in episode 4 with, how do I get to that Larry Bird Magic conversation? I'm not in that conversation. I'm just known as a scorer, a guy that holds the scoring titles but can't win the big game. And you think about it today and you're like, who would ever say that about Michael Jordan? But then you think back, and he had been in the league now for 6 or 7 years. And again, while he had put up all the points and he'd won all the scoring titles and the defensive player of the year and MVPs, he hadn't won the big one yet. And regardless of sport, regardless of time, regardless of era, that question will be a constant for the greats. It happened to LeBron. It happened to Kobe and Shaq. It happened to Michael Jordan. It happened to Peyton Manning. It's going to happen to every great that's ever lived. If you can't win the big game, that will separate you from the upper echelon. And at that time, that was Michael Jordan. And so he gets his opportunity against Magic, and they soundly beat the Lakers. They show Scottie Pippen locking down Magic Johnson. I mean, they talked about, again, Magic was Showtime Lakers. No one picked up Magic and guarded him for 94 feet. And they said Scottie picked him up at basically full court and guarded Magic and just locked him down. Knew what Magic wanted to do, was in Magic's face, couldn't give him anywhere to move. And that just showed the ability of Scottie's defensive play to be able to guard a guy that was basically, Scottie Pippen and do it at a level that was no one had ever been able to do it. So it was interesting to see that. And they just showed like little highlights of Scottie just picking him up 3/4 court and just sticking on him like glue, which was, again, shocking to see. Stuff you would never, somebody that didn't live in that era, I think I was born a year later, you would never know unless this documentary went back or you just watched old game footage. But wow, I mean, that was pretty cool to see. Now, granted, this wasn't the 1980s Magic Johnson, but regardless, anybody picking up Magic Johnson like Scottie Pippen did and kind of shutting him down, pretty impressive. So the Bulls win Michael Jordan's first NBA title, the Bulls' first NBA title. And basically the way they closed the series out, and this was another kind of peeling back of the layer of Michael Jordan, how he became one of the greatest of all time, was Michael had not had to lean on his teammates in a capacity that he'd have to in this series, or at least in the last closeout game. Phil is imploring Michael, listen, John Paxson's open. John's open. Get him the ball. John's open. And Michael's like, okay. And he goes and drives the lane, attracts a double team, kicks it out to John Pax, nails a shot. And Michael said from that point on in the game, he's like, all right, I'm just going to keep doing it. And he starts to learn to, and even in clutch moments, trust his teammates in these clutch moments. And I have a feeling that in episodes 5 and 6 and beyond, we're going to see that, that reoccurring with Michael Jordan, because that is how he, again, won more titles. The trusting of Steve Kerr, of Scottie, of Dennis. Those things came from these first story arcs that we're getting early in the dominance of Michael Jordan. And again, these things are built, these episodes are built so beautifully because they show the learning curve of Michael Jordan and those of his teammates and how those teammates came to be on that last 97-98 team. We saw it in the first 2 episodes with Scottie. We see it again with Scottie in episode 4 mostly, but in 3 and 4 with Dennis Rodman and where he came from and how he began to be a great part of the Bulls team as well. But we see the learning curve. We see the forming, of the 97-98, I guess the last year of a dynasty. We see how that came to be. And that series was won by Michael Jordan learning to trust his teammates. And so Michael gets his first title. They talk about Michael's emotion just overwhelming him and how his teammates were like, we didn't know if this guy actually had emotions other than just rage and anger and passion of fury of basketball. We didn't know he experienced happiness or just any other emotion. And they show him crying, holding the Larry O'Brien trophy, and his dad in the locker room with him. And so it's just a really cool moment. And one of those iconic moments where, the one where Michael has the white hat on and his head is on the Larry O'Brien and he's just kind of shaking. It's one of those iconic moments that you see in a flash if it weren't for this documentary. But because this documentary is so well made and is so well detailed, you see that the struggle that Michael went through in those 7 years to get to that point. The understanding of finally getting over the hump of, winning that first playoff series, then getting over the hump of beating the Pistons and finally getting to that championship and overcoming Magic Johnson to win it. It's a special look at the journey to get there, the stuff that you don't get to see just by looking at the highlight of Michael going down the lane with the right hand in game 2 and then switching it over and finishing the layup with the left. And yes, we've seen Magic Johnson talk about that play specifically so many times before, but you don't see the totality of it until that moment. So that was episode 4. I think that this thing is one of the greatest docuseries I've ever seen. And I know this is like prisoner of the moment kind of thing, get wrapped up and everything, but man, they're so well made and they fit together like a glove because they show the humble beginnings of the players themselves and the coaches themselves. And then they tie it back to that season. They tie it back to, coming from an innocent kind of honest beginning to then being in the industry, being in the business, going through the road games, being on the road, being in a season, winning championship after championship after championship. And then you're at the top of the mountain and trying to stay there while dealing with media obligations. Is Jordan going to retire? Is Phil back next year? Is this whole thing over just game after game after game? It shows the road leading there and the struggles that were there to just get to that point, and then the struggles that come with being at the top. So it's so well made. And it even highlights some of the characters that are going to be the antagonists at the end of this series. And, you see him a little bit in the flash forward and flashbacks, like Jerry Krause. You got to think about this. As much as I don't like Jerry Krause for saying the things he said about Phil Jackson, about the players not winning championships and organizations winning championships. And again, even in episode 4, doubling down on the fact that, listen, Michael can come play here again after the 98 season, but Phil Jackson's not going to be here. It's not going to happen. Just the stubbornness that he had at that time, it shows, again, the honest beginnings of building a dynasty and power going to a guy's head, because Jerry Krause, you got to think about it, pulled the trigger on the Michael Jordan draft pick, pulled the trigger on the trades for guys like Horace Grant and for guys, guys like Horace Grant, drafting Scottie Pippen, bringing in Dennis Rodman, bringing in Phil Jackson, bringing in John Collins. Like he's a big deal as far as how this thing started. Bringing that all together was kind of a lot on him. But when it's just like we're seeing with the players, when you get to the top, egos get tested, things get a little bit more personal as far as money and who did what and who's responsible for greatness and all that. And we see that's how sometimes an empire collapses. But we aren't there yet. We are not there yet. So I can't wait for episodes 5 and 6. Episodes 3 and 4 were awesome. Episodes 1 and 2 were fantastic. So I don't know what other superlative I'm going to give for 5 and 6. It's going to be amazing. Think of a great word to describe something being awesome and fill it in there. But let me know what you guys think. My voice is almost gone. Sorry. I do these for like an hour, so it's hard just talking for an hour straight, especially after having my doctor-ordered bourbon as I watch and take my notes. So let me know what you guys think. This should be on YouTube this week, so I'll download the VOD, put it up there in chronological order. I know episode 1 and 2 aren't up yet, so give me some time on that, but I will have those up. Make sure you guys follow the Twitch if you guys haven't yet, and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube I have the W.A.D.E Concept podcast on YouTube. Probably go subscribe there because that's where all this is going to be. But you guys will see at the screen end here, the end screen, that I have one Wade Plemons. You can go subscribe over there too. I'm not very organized where I tell you guys to go. Just find me on YouTube, the W.A.D.E Concept, Wade Plemons. Subscribe there. Follow here. Follow me on Twitter. I'm on there sometimes. Anyway, thank you guys. I will see you here next week at 8:30 p.m. sharp, and we'll talk about episodes 5 and 6. Until then, see you next time.